no one expects it to end anytime soon, as the Israelis themselves are saying that it's going to be a long haul. It's going to be a long war. Today, ironically, America is supporting Ukraine in a very big way. The real strategic challenge where the focus should be remains China. I think it's a short-term tactical move by the Chinese, which they realize that given the economic challenges that they face, how Sheikh Hasina deals with them, I think it's very likely that she would emerge as a winner. The worst possible outcome is those power centers don't work together. They work in different directions. I think that is very difficult both for Pakistan and for others who want to engage with Pakistan.
Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory. I'm Naghma and we wish you a very happy new year. This is the first episode of the Ideas Factory in this new year, and we will be looking at some of the broad trends that are emerging in the world as the world sees two big conflicts that are still continuing, the Russia-Ukraine war, and of course now the conflict that we see in West Asia, the Hamas and Israel war that is continuing. In fact, that is getting further aggravated, and there is a fear of the war spilling over in the entire region. The lines have been drawn very sharply, and there are two sides that we see. So what are the broad themes that are emerging out of the world order in this year? We'll be looking at that. A very warm welcome to you, Harsh, for joining us.
Hello, Naghma. Happy New Year to you and to everyone else.
So, Harsh, when we look at the world right now, we are in the middle of two very big conflicts. The Russia-Ukraine war continues, but in the middle of that, there is a new conflict that has been going on for the past few months, and that is the war between Hamas and Israel. And now there are many other countries that have also, in a way, joined in, not directly, but we see the involvement of many countries around the area, be it Iran or Lebanon, and the recent attacks on Iran. If we can begin with, what do we see in West Asia and what are the trends that are emerging out of that region? Will that war spill over? The lines have been drawn very clearly and sharply, and we see two very divided house there, because when Iran was bombed, the Russian president also gave out a very strong statement. Here, US has been issuing warnings. So we see that division very sharply there. Will that war now involve more countries and spill over in the region, and in a way also affecting the global economy?
Yeah, so Naghma, I think the biggest aspect of the world order today is that how significant hard powers emergence has been strikingly important in how states are wielding hard power to achieve their objectives, national objectives. And I think that in some ways encapsulates the multiple conflicts that we are witnessing. And you would recall that perhaps in some ways China's assertion of its own military dynamic across East and Southeast Asia, and then of course with us in the Himalayan borders, perhaps paved the way in some ways for this changing dynamic, where other states also feel comfortable in using hard power in ways that are becoming very apparent. Of course, we are talking of two big conflicts, but we also saw last year the Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, and that also erupted, but that was in some ways that led to a decisive conclusion, that met a decisive conclusion. But in these two cases, particularly now as last year's war in the Middle East has been dragging on, and no one expects it to end anytime soon, as the Israelis themselves are saying that it's going to be a long haul, it's going to be a long war, and multiple fronts have been opening up. Lebanon, you have Iran, and as you pointed out, the geopolitical dimension where Russia, Iran have come together in significant ways, at least rhetorically, and of course you have a very silent China playing, God knows what maneuver in the region, and of course Americans taking a distinctive position on this issue very solidly. At least Biden administration standing behind Israel so far, though voices of discontent rising in the US as well as the war drags on. So I think the issue, the threat of this spilling over into neighboring areas is already visible. We have seen, for example, the Lebanon front open in a very dramatic way. And of course, what has happened in Iran shows us, where it can go. But I think there is, of course, an interest, and there would be an interest on the part of Israel to keep it. Keep it constrained, keep it bounded, and of course you have the Arab Gulf states who would also want to, like the Saudis or the UAE, would also want to contain it because they have other interests that they would want to preserve. So I think till such time as Israel does not decide on its future course of action, or at least its strategic end game, it is very difficult to see a calm coming over that region, and we will continue to witness a lot of turmoil within the region, and as a result around the world, because a lot of commotion that we have seen in Europe, in the US in the last few months, has also been a result of the dissatisfaction with the war in the Middle East. So I think there are multiple fronts here which one has to take into account as one looks at this particular conflict.
Sure, especially now that we have the American elections. I mean, America, Biden is entering into his election year. What will be the? Do you see it impacting the elections there? There are, of course, there's a group of people who are very anti this war and the kind of atrocities that we've seen in Gaza after the Hamas attack and the war started. So the opinions are divided very sharply. And then the Russia-Ukraine war. So how are these things going to play out in this year, considering it's also an election year?
Yes, Americans, it's very ironic that many in the US, for example, and especially as you would recall during end of Obama years and then Trump years, one of the biggest rallying cry was that no more wars, no more foreign wars, and we will not support them, and we will sort of withdraw from these multiple theaters that America has been engaged with. Today, ironically, America is supporting, Ukraine in a very big way in its struggle with the Russians, and you have the support for Israel. And as you point out rightly, in the US, it has become a divisive point, particularly, I think, for Mr. Biden, whose administration stands solidly behind Israel, but various constituencies that have supported the Democrats, the youth in particular, seem to be deserting the Democratic Party on this issue. If the polling is to be believed, if the polling numbers are anything to go by. So I think for Mr. Biden, this is going to be a very, very challenging issue as to how he continues to support Israel, and at the same time continues to build his own campaign, which is also in quite a shambles, if one can use that word, because there is no wider narrative that has yet emerged from Mr. Biden, although he has just given a speech attacking MAGA and Trump. But by and large, there is a mood emerging that he's losing the narrative war, that Trump, despite all his legal challenges, is still the front runner, and that is going to hurt him, because if his own constituencies do not support him solidly. So in this particular case, I think wars and both Ukraine and Middle East are going to be in some ways going to be a drag on his candidacy. And similarly, I think we are seeing in Europe there is a lot of dissatisfaction with continuing Ukraine war. There is many countries are openly expressing their displeasure at the war dragging on, because the impact on ordinary individuals is quite high, and I think that is having an impact at a societal level on the politics of the European countries. And similarly on Israel and Hamas war, there is a lot of divisiveness that one is witnessing in Israel. So I think if you think of West as a unit, you see a lot of divisions there, which I think will be a constraining factor as the West decides to tackle some of these challenges. And broader challenge, Naghma, remains that for many in the West, the real strategic challenge where the focus should be remains China. And anything that distracts from what is happening with China and in the Indo-Pacific becomes a problem. So I think for many, from a strategic point of view, that's a question that many Europeans and Americans are asking. And I think many for example, in the Indo-Pacific would be asking as well, as to what happens to this part of the world if the energies, diplomatic, military, political, are being drained out in the Middle East and in Eurasia.
Yes, of course. So the big question remains whether we will see an end to these conflicts, the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the war that's being right now fought in West Asia. While we talk of that and we talk of China, very interesting to also note the the change in approach that we now see in the China's approach vis-a-vis United States. So how do you see that playing out, Harsh? There have been a lot of the relations have been tense over a range of issues, whether it's national security or there are global conflicts or Taiwan or the climate change, many issues. But right now, as China and US celebrate like the 45th year of the start of the diplomatic relation, we've had statements coming out from China where they say that cooperation is no longer an option, but it's an imperative. So, in the U.S.-China relationship, how would it unfold? Do you see a change in approach there?
I think for China, it certainly makes a lot of sense to change track on the US, and the Xi Jinping's speech at the year end was an acceptance in some ways of the economic turbulence that China is facing. He acknowledged the problems Chinese economy is facing, many Chinese are facing. And I think that's a recognition that China has to change course in some ways. And the easiest thing for China to do is to reach out to the US and in some ways stabilize that relationship, because if there has been one factor systemically that can derail the China story, then that is America and the cloud that America wields in the West. So I think Europe has tried to do two things. China has tried to do two things. It has tried to reach out to Europe separately. And it has tried to, reset the terms of engagement with the Biden administration. We have seen a number of visits. We have seen the Biden Xi meeting as well, and Xi's visit to China to the US late last year. But for the US, it's very difficult to see how American policy changes dramatically over the course of next year, especially as this is an election year. And I think during an election year, it would be very difficult for any candidate to even make a modicum of conciliatory gesture towards China. I think Americans are now set on a strong, robust China policy, whichever party if you can think of. Apart from Mr. Trump, who is unpredictable, I think the two parties and the mainstream view in the two parties is quite serious about the China challenge that America faces, and I think that's going to be the trajectory from their part. And any diversion from them is going to be a challenge in an election year. And I don't think from the American side there is any incentive at this particular point to change track. Although certainly a stable relationship with China, a China that does not do anything mischievous in an election year, say in Taiwan Straits, is something that Americans would want, the Biden administration would want. So there is a need for certain kind of stabilization. But I don't think any broader rapprochement is in the offing, although Chinese would certainly want that. Of course, China has been, very interestingly, Chinese media has also made some interesting overtures towards India. There have been some positive stories for a change about India as well. So I think Chinese have understood that they have overplayed their hands and they have to recalibrate some of these policies. How far will they go? Whether there is a fundamental reassessment, I don't think so. But again, I think it's a short-term tactical move by the Chinese, which they realize that given the economic challenges that they face, it would be very imprudent of them to continue to make enemies like they have done in the past few years. So let us see how this evolves over the course of this year.
Yes, we can see this as a tactical move by China. It's been interesting, of course, as you pointed out, also praises for Prime Minister Modi and India. Now, if we look at India's neighborhood, there are a couple of elections that India is very keenly watching. And if we begin with Bangladesh clearly, we can say that this country is at an inflection point, whether it's economically or geopolitically. It has been a stable economy. The economy has been on an upswing. Now, there's quite a bit at stake there, Harsh, for India as well. India's buffer state priorities, of course, and then China's stake there with the Belt and Road vision that China has. Now, Sheikh Hasina is seeking a fourth term. What is at stake for India there, and how important are these elections in Bangladesh in the sense that what would be the impact of a change in regime or the Sheikh Hasina government continuing? This election is being watched very closely.
Yes, indeed, very important election for I think for Bangladesh, for India, for the region, and in some ways for the world, because here is a very important country in the Bay of Bengal, which has been doing very well. So Bangladesh, has been a success story in economic terms, and in some ways you have to give credit to Sheikh Hasina for giving it the kind of political stability that allowed Bangladesh to achieve some of the results that are now that it is now showing. So certainly in that sense, Bangladesh has done well for itself, and something that India can also be a stakeholder in, because India would want its eastern periphery to be stable and to be prosperous. So in that sense, Bangladesh has been a very important partner, and that we know the kind of investments that Mr. Modi, his government has made in crafting a relationship with Sheikh Hasina's government. So certainly there will be a lot of interest in seeing a continuation of the Hasina government in Bangladesh. But of course, we know that it's going to be turbulent, given that the opposition may not accept the results, or given that opposition may continue to protest after the election results are out. And so, how Sheikh Hasina deals with them, because I think it's very likely that she would emerge as a winner, given the circumstances. But how then she deals with the protests that are inevitable? How will she deal with the unrest that is inevitable? And what kind of an international support she's able to garner for herself? Because I think what is interesting, and we were talking about China, both China and India have been two of the steadfast partners of Bangladesh, whereas the West has been very critical, and West has also been putting pressure on India to have a different policy. But India has always been very clear that Bangladesh is something that India continues to engage with, especially Sheikh Hasina. And I think the problem for India, like in most parts of its neighborhood, remains, and that if the West is not dealing with it, if India also becomes takes a distance, then China becomes the beneficiary. So whether I don't think India would want that. I don't think the West would want that. So I think in that sense, it's an interesting combination of factors. But there is no denying the fact that these elections are going to be very consequential, because the next few years are going to be very consequential, both for the role that Bangladesh will play in the wider Indo-Pacific balance of power, as well as how Bangladesh will keep on engaging multiple stakeholders, which has been the foreign policy of Sheikh Hasina, whether it is the West, whether it is China or India. I think she has made it very clear that she wants to deal with everyone on equal terms. So in that sense, I think India and others would be watching very carefully what happens in these elections, and especially how Sheikh Hasina deals with post-election transition.
Another election, very important election to watch out for, is Pakistan. Apparently, the Senate has approved a resolution for delaying the elections, but as a former prime minister is in jail, he's been calling that this election would be fast. The Pakistan elections, what do you expect there?
I think Pakistan elections, like most elections, are being, in some way stage managed. You have the military that is trying to bring certain actors together, trying to make an outcome, create an outcome which they can decide. But in some ways, I think we have seen, for example, a reassertion of the military in the last year or so, and we have also seen that with the return of Nawaz Sharif, for example, an interesting narrative which is now being coming up in terms of acknowledging Pakistan's failures, and also looking more positively at India's success. And I think that if that becomes more of a normative consensus within the Pakistani polity, then that in some ways opens a space for India-Pakistan dialogue to emerge after the elections.
But Harsh, just to add, in Pakistan itself, will these elections really matter? Or what is the significance, or would you call it, or would it be like a fast? We know that the military is all powerful, and like the former prime minister is calling it a fast. I mean, what would change with these elections in Pakistan politics?
I don't think much will change. I think You would recall when Nawaz Sharif was brought to the center stage, the rest of the political parties were saying that it is stage managed, it is a farce, and now when Imran Khan was brought to the center stage, the rest of the party was saying that. So I think now that Mr. Khan is in a difficult position, he's calling it a farce. So I think that's par for the course in Pakistani politics. I don't think, but we should see a strengthening of democratic institutions to be one of the outcomes of these elections. But I think certainly if you can have some political parties which can work with the military in some ways and generate some positive outcomes, is the best you can expect, because you have multiple power centers, and the worst possible outcome is those power centers don't work together, they work in different directions. I think that is very difficult both for Pakistan and for others who want to engage with Pakistan. If you can have all these power centers actually trying to work together and have something in mind for Pakistan, whether it's domestic economic policy or foreign policy, I think that gives others a stake in terms of how we can engage with Pakistan, and that includes India. So I would say that if that happens, even for a short period, you can get a semblance of stability, because what was happening was that after the initial few months of Imran Khan's government, we have seen a lot of challenges and the differences as they emerge between the military and Mr. Khan. I think that made it virtually impossible for Pakistan to be governed, and that is the worst possible outcome.
All right. Just to wrap up this very first episode of Ideas Factory in this new year, Harsh, the big stories or the big trends that are emerging out of this year would clearly be the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the West Asia conflict that we now see between Hamas and Israel, and of course, the US elections, the US-China relations. Would you agree? These are the things that one would watch out for.
Absolutely, because wars, the outcome of wars is never certain. We don't know how these two wars might end and what kind of other second and third order effects they create. And then you have the other kind of issues which are related to democracy. We also don't know. Sometimes democracy throws up challenges and surprising outcomes. We don't know what kind of outcomes are coming our way, whether it is US, whether it is Pakistan, whether it is even in India, we have elections this year. So I think that's the beauty and that's the challenge of democracies. So I think we'll have to look at these very interesting trends very, very carefully and continue to engage with whatever comes our way as analysts and people interested.
We'll keep analyzing all of that in other episodes that we will be bringing to you. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you, Harsh, for joining us.
Thank you.